Hello, everyone. Welcome to this is 5 of 6, right? So we're coming towards the end of this wonderful lecture series. It is with great pleasure that I introduce Ketty Gottardo, who is a specialist in old master drawings and has held posts at the Louvre, the Getty, Christie's in Paris, and of course now she is at the Courtauld Institute of Art. I thought we'd start. I had a question for Ketty, a somewhat personal interest question, which is, as some of you may know, the Courtauld is undergoing renovations. And so I was hoping Ketty could update us on how that is going and then maybe mention a couple of her upcoming projects for when the Courtauld Gallery reopens. And then we'll get into questions.
Yes, with pleasure. And hi, everyone. So the Courtauld Gallery closed in September 2018, and we are looking forward to our reopening next year, sometimes in the summer. And with all large building projects, of course, this has already been delayed a little bit. We were supposed to actually open at the end of this winter, but now it will be next summer. And we're really looking forward to it because, yeah, the collection, we are really missing seeing it every day and seeing in the galleries. And but this time during our closure, it was a good occasion for us to work, of course, on projects for when we reopen. And personally, I've been working on a few drawings projects. One is the catalog of our Flemish drawings collection.
Oh, nice.
Which is tiny, only 300 drawings, but with some interesting work by Rubens, Van Dyck, and so on. And then I'm also working on an exhibition on the drawings by Henry Fuseli, so the Swiss artist who spent most of his career in London. And he was a Royal Academician. Right. And actually, at the time when the Royal Academy was at the Courtauld, so was at Somerset House. Yeah. So it's like a nice, occasion to be able to do that.
Thank you. Those sound like great projects. Just for those of you who don't know already, the Courtauld's home is usually in Somerset House, which is a historic building on the Strand. But because it's a historic building, it had lots of, quirky issues in terms of accessibility and whatnot. And then also, just so you all know, the Courtauld have kind of been going through and publishing catalog raisonné of various bits of their drawing collection, and the Spanish drawings were published, maybe 10 years ago now in a catalog raisonné.
Yeah, absolutely, 2011. So yeah. 10 years exactly. And that was the first of these sort of schools to be published. So
that's great. Yeah, and it's a brilliant publication for anyone who doesn't know it already. I strongly encourage you to check it out. So, and I'm glad to hear you're onto the Flemish stuff now. So just to start with some of the questions that we got over the Canvas platform. The first one is on a character that I'm also deeply partial to, Sterling Maxwell. And the question was, why was he so interested in Spain specifically?
Yeah, good question. I actually don't know correctly why. I mean, I don't know precisely how to answer this, how really his interest started, whereas whether it was started because of work, a Spanish work of art that he saw that really changed his interest, and or whether it was a publication. We know for sure, and you, Amanda, if you know more, please step in, that he started traveling across Spain following this guidebook that was published in the 1840s in English. And so, of course, being that an English publication, he got to know more about Spain, its geography and its history, and probably that helped spurring his interest, I would think, and noticing probably through that again in English there weren't really publications that one could go to, and probably he thought he was very well placed to do it, and actually he was. And his publication that I talked about, the Annals, were also really an amazing source, because for the first time he understood how important were images with the text. So when you sort of talk a work of art, you can do the ekphrasis, you can explain it, you can describe it, but of course it never substitutes an image. And what books used to do before was to include prints. There were engravers who would reproduce these paintings or these works through prints. But of course, he had understood how this, in a way, would change a little bit the nature of the works, because of course prints would have been primarily in black and white. And so that's how it came about with the idea of the talbotypes, so which were really the precursory of modern photography, and therefore that again revolutionized the field.
Yeah, Sterling Maxwell is an interesting character. It's funny because I was thinking about that question as well, and you know why he became interested in Spain. And the only thing I can add is I know he visited Spain fairly, you know, early in his career, and so I don't know what came first, the chicken or the egg, but it may be that visit. But I think you mentioning the guidebook that he followed, and also just right around the middle of the 19th century, Spain was starting to be very popular in Britain anyway. And there's a number in Scotland in the case of Sterling Maxwell, but and I think, you know, it's partly that this is really sort of Spain opening up. There's more Spanish artwork on the art market, as previous speakers have mentioned. And so it's kind of in the air in a way. So I don't know of a specific reason. That doesn't mean there isn't one, but I think it is worth mentioning this kind of like interest in Spain. Yeah, and Spain's still kind of seen as exotic. So traveling there was not risky, but it was seen as like an adventure in a way that going to, say, Paris wasn't. But yeah, thank you. So the next question is about our wonderful friend Ribera and his horrific images of saints. And the question was, what were collectors' intentions in purchasing some of these horrific scenes? And I think this question comes specifically out of the context of, we had Xavier Bray speak with us last week, and he mentioned that the collectors who formed the Wallace Gallery were a little bit creeped out by Ribera's images, and so he didn't collect them. But in this case, we have examples of collectors actually seeking out these horrific images. So do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, I mean, as I briefly mentioned in that presentation, there was clearly a market for these scenes at the time, because it wasn't only Ribera. I mean, Ribera made some of the most beautiful, if one can call them that way, in the sense that they are really poignant, they really speak to us, they are strong images, but he wasn't the only one at the time. And these pictures, these drawings, these prints were collected. So there was clearly a market and a taste of, say, 18th or 17th century collectors being interested in these dramatic scenes, especially those dramatic scenes, I would say, of saints either being flagellated, being punished, being martyred. So there was clearly on one side, a religious interest, I think, and on the other hand, yeah, these dark images, somewhere less horrific than Ribera's, did clearly appeal to collectors, but not only collectors. I mean, they were also to be found, of course, in churches as well. and so it clearly proves that there was a market, and they had some value, monetary value.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that, obviously all collectors are, idiosyncratic and they have their issues. And there's been some wonderful research on, just this kind of popularity for Spanish art in 19th century Britain, which was, of course, an emphatically Protestant nation. And so all of these images are in some ways outside of the kind of religious context once they're in Britain. But I also think we at the Meadows, we tend to talk about Ribera in the kind of context of Spanish art, but of course he was working largely in Naples, and his work and even these kind of dramatic images fit very well with that kind of Caravaggio-esque type painting. And so yes, there's definitely a market for that, particularly in England. And I think I don't know what it would be like to live with one of those images, but as I tell my husband all the time, sometimes it's about the how, not the what. Enjoy the paint, not the subject matter.
And of course, Ribera was really unsurpassed in the definition, for example, in his paintings, of the texture of the skin, the texture also of the blood. And so these really are very real. They are close to us. And so I would imagine that both the 17th century collector and the 19th century British collector would have really much liked that they really were realistic, that they were really very poignant, because very close to us, to whoever looks at them.
Yeah, absolutely. The next question is about the Goya's Witches and Old Women album, so-called album D. And it's a wonderful question that I think partly answers itself. But the question is, why did Goya create such grotesque figures, floating, dancing, falling? Is it a testament to his satirical wit, despair, emotional state of mind? What do they mean?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And you probably have also thought about it, Amanda, because of the Goya drawing that
yes.
You acquired. Yeah, it's difficult to know. I wasn't able to sort of find any proper reason, that we can grasp. Because these albums, these drawings remain very private, and he only shared some of them with really very close people. They may have known the reason for this, and the reason hasn't been sort of passed along. Of course, by floating, which is not natural, they become fantastic figures. So at the same time, they are realistic because they are depicted as very human with all their defaults. They are old, or they are nasty. You can see their characters coming through their expressions, the way they are depicted. But it's really my guess, so it's not really art historically been proven, but by levitating, by depicting that way, they are representing a little bit like dreamlikes, like visions, surreal, and in that way he was also able to convey a message. It has been sort of suggested that if these drawings were caught, ended up in hands of someone who could have sort of made Goya's life difficult, they could have been at least read as being just imagination, coming out of his own imagination. Whereas, of course, we now know that some were criticizing real people.
Yeah, it's a really interesting problem. Again, as I read the question, I was thinking, yes, floating. Yes. Are they dancing? Are they falling? Are they going up, coming down? They're struggling. Goya is very good at disorientating us by getting rid of any sort of ground. Some of the drawings do have a kind of ground. The figures are grounded. But you know, it's in some ways all of the above, and we don't know, and it's partly what make these drawings so deeply fascinating and enigmatic. The last time I had a conversation with Juliette Wilson Barreau, she suggested that, well, I think she seemed very convinced that these drawings were produced in anticipation for a print series. We don't know that for sure. I think it's a perfectly good, guess. Why else maybe does he number them or move them around and that sort of thing? But then we get back to, but why? Why is he producing a print series of this? And, keep in mind, Which is an Old Women album is a name we've given to that. We've, meaning art historians, modern art historians. That's not in any way associated with what Goya called these drawings. All we know about what Goya called them is the inscriptions he included at the bottom. But for those of you who know the Capriccios, the inscriptions sometimes are as enigmatic and clever and deal with wordplay as the drawing itself. So yeah, this is all an elaborate art historian speak way of saying we don't know. But of
course makes Goya so fascinating, because art historians want to try to decrypt what is hidden in these works.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last thing I'll say, Ketty had pointed out in her presentation the way that Goya used this high quality paper, and then he could use a blade to scrape away at it. So, just what we learned from the object itself is we can say these aren't just quick things he dashed off. He actually thought about them, he cared about them, whether or not they were in a bound album to start with or after, but going back through numbering them, erasing the inscriptions, rewriting inscriptions. So minimally, we can say this wasn't just something quick he dashed off. He came back to them and reworked them. So that actually just makes them more puzzling, of course, but anyway.
Because we sort of know the dates more or less in which produced. We know how long it took him to produce them. So yes, that also means thinking about them and reworking them, and probably also throwing away some.
Exactly. Yeah. No, and I should just add that the examination that they did at the Courtauld Institute on actually our drawing before it was our drawing, and others in the series have been absolutely instrumental to understanding what's going on there. So we're very grateful for that. I think we have one question. What sketches are left in the album, or is it empty? So I can answer that insofar as they were unbound. So Ketty mentioned in her lecture, Goya's grandson, who we have a portrait of at the Meadows, sold the drawings. They were bought by Madrazo, and that's where that kind of pink paper you saw in Ketty's presentation came from. But they were completely disbound and scattered, essentially. So do you know of any that are kind of still together? Yeah, I don't.
No. The only one is the Sanlúcar album in Madrid,
right?
Which is slightly different, smaller in dimension, but none has been preserved in that way.
Yeah, it's a weird story where so the Goya's binding long gone, but then they were put into a new album by the Madrazos, which, because they're this important family in the history of Spanish art, that kind of layer of history and provenance is very important. But then that's even now gone. So that
the only album, and I mentioned in the lecture, that has remained but with no drawings inside anymore, is the Metropolitan Museum's, which still has that binding, but now empty of the drawings, because
exactly. But that's how we know about that pink paper, right? Yeah. And the pink paper is bizarrely important, because again, when I mentioned this wonderful analysis the Courtauld did on our drawing Visions, they were able to find the remnants of that pink paper, which is of course a key piece of provenance information. So it's funny what turns out, the gold dust that kind of produces nuggets in the end. So I think our last question was about the Courtauld's absolutely stunning portrait of Saavedra by Goya. And the person mentions that Saavedra was active in the Saratoga siege and the Yorktown battle. And so she wondered if the portrait was commissioned and if Saavedra had a particular side in the Peninsular War. And did he also go into exile to France after the war as Goya did? And so this is a question kind of about provenance, and then finally, how did the portrait end up in the Courtauld's collection?
So perhaps I reply to number 2 and 3 first.
Yeah. So first the Saavedra stuff, and then
So no, he didn't go to France, and in the Peninsular War, he was on the Spanish side.
Yeah.
And the provenance, I'll share the screen because I want to show you the other painting. Here we go. Can you see that?
Yep.
Yeah, here we
go.
It
looks good.
So we don't know for sure, but the sitter of the painting at left, who is Gaspar Melchor de Jovellanos, probably commissioned both paintings, so the one on left and the one on right, which is at the Courtauld, because of the existence, of this other painting, which is in Madrid, more or less the same size, and also the type of setting. But moreover, and very interestingly, because the two paintings ended up in each other's families. So Saavedra the Saavedra painting descended through Jovellanos family, and vice versa for the Jovellanos painting. And our Goya painting came to the Courtauld. It was donated in 1947 by Lord Lee of Fareham, and I'll show you an image of him. First, the Viscount Lee of Fareham, and he was with Samuel Courtauld and Robert Wheat, also among those who were really behind the beginning and the inauguration of the Courtauld and the existence of the Courtauld. And beyond the Goya painting, he donated also many other works, not only paintings but also other decorative arts and just a few drawings. And to go back to the Goya paintings, so Jovellanos was a minister of justice while Saavedra was Minister of Finance. They were ministers for a very brief period, in fact, because of the really sudden changes in the politics and the favorite of the monarchy, Godwa, who had them put in place as ministers, then actually made, let's say, their life difficult, and therefore they were dismissed, and they both left the government at that time. So they were really very briefly ministers at the same time, and it was really just a little bit before that, 1796, I think, when they became acquainted, but they then actually remained friends throughout their lives after that. And I will also just like to apologize because I realized, looking at my PowerPoint a couple of days ago, that when I gave the dates for Goya, I had written 1848 as the death date for Goya, so apologies, that was a typo. He died in 1828.
He really did live a long time.
But not that long.
Exactly.
So apologies for, to everyone. That was really a typo that I should have seen, and I didn't at the time.
I love this story of these two men sort of as friends and commissioning the portraits, and then the portraits ending up in each other's families. It's really a lovely story.
And so, in fact, they stayed, so at least these, our painting, the Saavedra, stayed in Spain up until the early 20th century, when it was then sold through a dealer, and therefore came to the UK actually just in the early 40s. So Lord Lee had it only for a very short period of time before he then donated to the Courtauld.
That's so fascinating. And, you know, one of the great things about the Courtauld collection is that the artwork purchased for it in many cases was purchased to be a study collection. So it's a little bit different than collectors buying things to say hang in their own home and then donating it to an institution. In this case, this was very self-consciously, you know, this is for the students, and that sort of thing. I love seeing these two portraits together as well. They often get used, if I were, at least when I've taught with them, as sort of evidence, potential evidence of Goya's sympathies for the kind of afrancesados, these people in Spain who were sympathetic to at least the French Enlightenment ideas. And so even though, as Ketty said, you know, of course they're supporting Spain in the Peninsular War, there's this kind of undercurrent of wanting to push Spain forward from a sort of kind of progressive political standpoint. And so these portraits are often sort of taught through that lens as us wanting to feel that Goya is sympathetic to that cause as well. And even these kind of pensive, melancholy expressions on both the figures' faces, I think, you know, it's hard not to think of their kind of struggle of being appointed to these important places as ministers, but then things taking a turn for the worse, as it were. So
yeah, they were both very advanced in their thinking, as you said, and what we would say enlightened.
Yes. Yeah.
Both of them. And Saavedra was more strategic, and probably strategic in both in the handling of his career and how he handled also the battlefield, especially during the time that he spent in America, in Cuba and in Florida, in Jamaica. And Jovellanos was probably slightly weaker, I mean more advanced in his thoughts and much more influential probably than Saavedra, but probably less tactic and less strategic, and probably that made it that he was sidelined by power for a longer time.
The portraits, of course, fit your description of their personalities just perfect. I think you have Jovellanos here is looking a little, you know, exactly, and Saavedra is much more, yeah. It's just a testament of Goya's powers as a portraitist.
Exactly.
And I think with that, we are at exactly 11 o'clock. So please join me in thanking the wonderful Ketty Gottardo for joining us and for sharing her collection with us. Yes, and the thank yous are pouring in here. So
thank you for your attention. That was a privilege. Thank you for asking me to contribute. I've enjoyed so much having the opportunity to look at our Spanish collection. So thank you.